So, can you learn a new language to a decent level with nothing but a Bible, a couple of translations in different languages to help you suss out what's going on, and a dictionary? This is what I'm going to be trying out this Lent. I'm going to see if I can do it with Portuguese. This here is the version that I have for Latin, which gives us an idea of the relative difficulty of the books involved. We'll talk a little bit about the algorithm towards the end. And this should give us an idea of at least a half reasonable approach for tackling the Bible in your language of choice. So here we can see what this means basically is that the higher the difficulty score, the harder the book. So this is based on the Sixto Clementine Vulgate, which I believe was published at the end of the 16th century, and it ranks that 1st John is the easiest book and 2nd Maccabees is the hardest at the bottom. There's some interesting pieces of data that actually come out of this, because there's a couple of difficulty jumps along the way that might be helpful for learners of Latin to look into. But one thing that I was quite surprised by when I was doing this is that when I threw a Portuguese Bible at it, I got a completely different result. I actually got information that told me that Leviticus was the easiest book to learn in Portuguese. So if we see here, the difficulty scores are different. When I explain how the algorithm works, it'll make a lot more sense, but I don't think... Some of you may see smaller values here. That doesn't necessarily mean that these books are easier than the Latin books. But yeah, so the plan is that what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through these books in order over the next 46 days and see how much Portuguese I can acquire. I'm trying to acquire Portuguese, by the way, for those who are curious, because my wife's family has Portuguese origin. Like a big part of their family background is Portuguese, and I'm trying to get my brother-in-law to learn Portuguese. He was already interested in it, and I figured I'd just give him a bit of a push by making it a bit competitive to see who can get the best at it. Now, I have an overwhelming advantage over him because I know Latin, and Portuguese is a Latin-derived language, and he doesn't. But on the other hand, he's also not restricting himself to just the Bible. So, hopefully, we'll be able to figure out if this actually works effectively for acquiring a good level of Portuguese skill, at least in reading and listening. So, what I'm thinking of doing is I'm going to go through these books here, and then I'll probably listen through them once I've gotten a reasonable grasp on how Portuguese works, because I figure that if I can get through Leviticus, 21,000 words, in the first 2 or 3 weeks or something like that, then I should have, somewhat of a grasp of Portuguese and how it works. And hopefully that will speed up the other ones, and then I can just start listening to get to what I've heard is the more difficult part of Portuguese, which is listening and speaking. I think this would be quite interesting to see if it's possible to learn a language completely from just a Bible with a translation in English alongside it, or multiple translations. Like, I have access to a couple of different translations that I can consult. I'm principally going to be consulting English against English against Portuguese, but I also have access to Latin as well to compare this against, among other translations. So with all that said, let's actually talk about how the difficulty scores are generated. So how it currently works, and this is going to sound like a really brute force kind of ugly technical method, is that this is essentially just the average difficulty of the words in the book. So how it works is that I have a frequency list, that is a list that orders the difficulties of the different words in a separate CSV file. So the word for and, like e, is number 1, and then like a is 2, or et and in, or whatever language I've thrown at my program. It gives you like the number 1 most popular word, down to like 8,000 or whatever. And so what it does then is that it takes this, and that gives the word its value inside of the book. And over time, if there's repeats, it will, the value that it contributes will reduce over time, because as you get more repeats, then it's going to be more familiar to a reader. So this difficulty score also acknowledges when more difficult words are repeated, and that means it's not as difficult, right? So this is only based on words. So as we will see, I've just clicked the same one because I'm using Ubuntu. As we'll see here, we see that the Latin scores are a lot higher than the Portuguese scores. Now, this doesn't mean that the Portuguese is any easier than the Latin, although I'm sure that many people will say, yes, Portuguese is significantly easier than Latin. What it means is that the average frequency of the words inside of the book is lower. So with 1 John, it's going to be different between this and Portuguese. Oh wait, I just clicked I thought it might switch places. So if we find first book of there we go. So we see here it's a lot lower in Portuguese. So the reason for this is because there are fewer repeats in Latin, because, like, I think I either said this in this particular recording or I said it in a previous take, but Latin works by having a lot of the words like to loaded into the noun itself, whereas as far as I know, it would seem that Portuguese has some other system of doing it. My entire exposure to Portuguese has been my father-in-law showing me a short video and a little bit of looking at the book of Leviticus before this. Maybe some listening to some Brazilian songs at some point, in the past. So I can't tell you that. But this doesn't do anything interesting with natural language processing. Like, this is just, if there's a particular word A or E, it doesn't discriminate between their particular uses in the sentence. It's just an absolute value. And the reason that I've done it this way is because the NLP technology for Latin is terrible. I tried using it to help with the Latin Reader project, and it cannot do something called lemmatization very easily at all. It kind of balks it, actually. For those who don't know what lemmatization is, it basically is taking some sort of conjugated form of a verb or a noun and reducing it to the typical state that we present it in a dictionary or something. So this might be the first person present singular or something like that. There's none of this going on here, so this might actually be a dramatically non-representative value of difficulty. So this only indicates in terms of the lack of variety of the actual words themselves rather than the lemmas at all. So this isn't necessarily the most accurate. What I would say is that 1 John and Leviticus do have a reputation for being quite easy. I know that the Jewish tradition has people start with the book of Leviticus first when learning Hebrew, and I think the Ethiopic tradition starts with 1 John when they're teaching Ge'ez to children. And it's also the one that I've seen represented in New Testament Greek textbooks often as a first book to choose. So it is at least paralleling that. If anybody who has more experience with NLP stuff would like to comment on my very crude and quite grim algorithm, then by all means do so. One of the things I didn't get around to was making some sort of optimized reading list, because I think that anybody who's technically inclined here will have immediately figured out that if you've got, or at least linguistically inclined, if you have all of these different books, they're going to have the most common words common across them to some extent. So, words like in, or the, or and, these are going to occur across all of them. So why not have an optimized reading list that gets the highest frequency ones out of the way first? And I considered doing this through a kind of an evolutionary algorithm perspective, but that doesn't really work. I'm not really sure how I'd approach it, and I'm not sure if it's really worth the time of thinking up a conclusion. Might be a good project for somebody else, though. So yeah, if anybody's interested in it, what I'm doing, by all means, pick a language that you want to learn. I'd suggest actually, if anybody here is not really even interested in languages and would like to get a better sense of the scriptures, pick up the ancient Greek or the Latin or something like this, and study the Bible, because what this will force you to do is to make you pay attention to the individual words more, and that might help with exegetical ability, your ability to tell what's going on in the sentence. So I wouldn't just dismiss it if you're not a language lover, but you're somebody who's just interested in getting deeper into the scriptures. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this. I don't know if this is of any help at all, or if anybody's even interested in it, but I'm thinking what I'll do is that at the end of every week, so we're on Wednesday now, so next Wednesday, I will upload the first week's progress of how things are going in terms of just learning a language with with a couple of Bible translations, more than two actually, so a few Bible translations and a dictionary. So yeah, I'll check back in a week. If anybody wants to join, please stick a comment in. Please share it. I am still going to be checking out the Latin readers. I understand that people want the Gospel of Matthew next month. That's already been checked. I still have yet to do the checking of the Life of Charlemagne, which I promised for the secular readers. That's going to happen this week. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I'd appreciate your comments. Thanks for watching.